just waiting for you. Do-do, do-do, do-do,
Thank you for tuning in to episode 40 of the Brooklyn Fishing Club podcast. I'm your host, Victor Lucia, founder and president of the club. I can't believe this is the 40th episode. I just want to say thank you to everyone who listens to the show. I promise to keep bringing you great interviews with the most interesting guests I can find. From now until Christmas, there will be a new episode every other Tuesday. Some of the guests include Mike Iaconelli, Brad Leone, Bill Dance, Patrick Sabile, and more. Visit brooklynfishingclub.com to sign up for our newsletter for announcements about which episode will be released next. Today we have a very special guest. This guy's an absolute legend in the fishing industry, and he's known for fishing with a ton of passion, sometimes teetering on the verge of madness. A pioneer of urban fishing and the only angler in the history of the sport to win the Bassmaster Classic, Bassmaster Angler of the Year, and the Bass Federation Championship. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Mike Iaconelli.
Before I don't even have memories. Like, I see pictures. Like, I think that was the beginning of it for me. You know, my uncle and my grandfather, I loved to fish. That was their thing, right? So, you know, as a young kid, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, growing up in the city, I was an oddball because these guys took me fishing. And so I think that's where it started, you know, and it's like, you know, when you're young and you engage in something that is fun and that, you know, you like, I think as you get older, it becomes something you want to keep doing. Right. So that's really, for me, I think the beginning, like I give the credit to my uncle and my grandfather because they're the ones that took me fishing. And you know, in the very, very beginning. So that was big for sure. That was big. That was mainly freshwater, and it was mainly, you know, in Pennsylvania, on the Delaware River, on the Schuylkill River when we were at home, and then it was on some family vacations. And that, you know, as I got older, that's really where now, you know, I start having those memories of the Poconos in Pennsylvania, the Jersey Shore, you know, Ocean City, Atlantic City, Barnegat, fishing out of places like that in the salt. You know, that's really where I started to take it from something that was just, this is fun, to, man, this is all I want to do. You know, like I can remember being a kid and where other kids my age were like, man, I want to go play baseball. I want to go, you know, shoot a puck around. I want to go, and I'm like, man, I want to go fishing. Who's got a rod? Let's go fishing, you know? But that was important too. You know, it was like those years, you know, from, you know, 7, 8, 9 years old to my early teens. That was important too, because then I really started to take it from something I liked to take it to something I was obsessed with, you know, and that's, you know, I think it's the same for a lot of people in whatever they love to do, whatever their passion is, right? It's like you have that early exposure and then you really love it and you start taking it to that next level. It never really leaves you, you know, it stays with you for life, you know?
So when did you start to have the idea that you wanted to fish competitively?
That came, you know, the funny thing is that came a lot later. I think, you know, I caught a bass when I was around 11 or 12, and that was a game changer. It was a topwater fish. I didn't even know what a topwater was, but that bite sort of got me into bass fishing. And then I think I was around 12, 13 when I started getting some of the magazines, you know, and you got to put this in context, right? Because I know a lot of people that are going to listen to this podcast, you know, or listen to this, they're younger people and they don't get this, but there was no internet back then. There was no phone. There was no tablet. There was no YouTube, you know, and it was like, so we're talking about the 80s, you know, the early 80s. And the best source was like magazines, you know? And when I started getting some of those magazines, in particular, like, you know, like In Fisherman, Bassmaster, and I started seeing this thing, you know, like for the first time that people competitively fish and make a living doing it. It sort of blew me away, but I don't, the interesting thing is I don't think then I said to myself, yeah, this is what I want to do. That actually came a lot later. That came when, I graduated high school. I joined my first fishing club. Then I started going to college, and that's when, so 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, that's the first time I really said to myself, man, this is something I want to try. This is something I want to pursue. How do I do it? That was the biggest problem, right? Because I didn't have a boat. I didn't have a fully rigged bass boat. I had a John boat. I had a couple buddies that like to fish. I fished for this fishing club. They all had small boats. How do I do it? That was like the biggest problem. I had this dream. I had this vision, but I'm from Jersey. At that time, I living in Jersey. I'm like, I'm Jersey. How do I do it? So, but the dream I think really started there. 18, 19 years old. That's really when that dream started for me.
So that John boat, would you consider that your first bass boat?
That was my first bass boat. Yeah, and that was a little later too. So I got that boat when I was 17 years old. So I was 17, going on 18. That I got that my senior year in high school, and it was just it's called a Coleman crawdad. So if if you're into tiny boats and John boats and stuff, it's a polyurethane John boat, which they're classic now. Like honestly, guys want them, but it was a very light boat. You could modify it. So I got that boat. A couple of my other buddies had beat up John boats, and we got plywood. We decked them out. We sort of made like mini bass boats out of them, and it sounds corny, but the great thing was it was like a ground level way for me to start experiencing bass tournaments and competitive fishing. And even this club I fished for, man, we only fished 10 guys in the club, so it's like these small little competitions we had for nothing more than probably beer money at the time, and but it was an early way for me to start learning and learning all the things there are to learn about competitive fishing. And some of those things aren't the obvious ones, right? The obvious ones are, you were learning different lures and how to fish different techniques on different lakes. Yeah, that happened. But it's like time management, decision making, how to land fish, how to cull fish, all that stuff, like really those years in that John boat, man, it was awesome. I would never get rid of that. That was an important part of my career.
Are you still in touch with any of those guys from the club?
All of them.
Oh, that's so cool.
All of them. Yeah,
That's awesome.
a couple of them. Yeah, a couple of them are lifelong friends that I've known since grade school. That I got lucky that I grew up with a couple guys that like to fish. So a couple of them are lifelong friends, and the rest of the club's still around. I'm an honorary member of the club, so I get to go back to like banquets every once in a while and see old faces. I'm really proud of it. The name of the club it's Top Rod Bassmasters, and they met their club meetings at the time were out of Runnymede, New Jersey, which is just the town I grew up in. So it was awesome. It was perfect.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm really interested in talking to you about urban fishing specifically because
Yes.
from what I can tell, you're the first person to put urban fishing on television. Am I wrong? I mean,
I would say one of the first to be able to be involved in a project that highlighted it for sure.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's always been really special to me, I think, because of, again, going way back to when my uncle and grandfather were taking me fishing, right? It was something I did early on. It was like where it all started. So I think that plus just the allure of urban fishing to me makes it special. And the allure to me, it's like the lost, it's like a lost way to fish. It's like this hidden gem. It's hiding in plain sight. And I love the fact that it's more like freestyle fishing. I'll try to explain that. It's like regular fishing. If you go out and it's salt or fresh, if you go out in a big boat and you're fishing more open water, rural areas, traditional type of fishing, it's very textbook. Like you do this, you make this kind of cast, you do this kind of drift. Where urban fishing to me is more like it's hand to hand, changing, freestyling, because there's less controllables. You're fishing. Oh yeah, it's gritty, and you're fishing, man-made objects and seawalls, and you're trying to make the impossible cast to get a fish out of the impossible place. And I don't know, it's just there's something magic to me about urban fishing. I love that fact about it. And the biggest part that I love about it is, it's a way to get new people fishing. And so, when you look at an urban center, city center, and, from the biggest cities in the world, like New York and LA and Chicago, to even smaller cities like, Cleveland or Sioux Falls or whatever, right? They're smaller cities too. It's where the biomass of people live. And those people are, they're losing connection to the outdoors. Fishing to me is a way to bring those people in. And almost every city, when you look at it, it has a waterway near it. Like, that's how cities were created, right? They were created around water. So it's a great way to get new people fishing. It's a great way to grow the sport. I love that about it. I think it's something that we need to keep, preaching. We need to keep telling people about this. It's still kind of undiscovered. It's still kind of undiscovered. Yeah,
I've been trying to talk to people about it for years, and everybody is either totally aware of it or they're like, really? I never even thought of that. But it's just like you said, it's like most cities have a lot of water by them. And
yeah,
I know you've traveled all over to many different cities. One of the people I know you fished with was my buddy Fred over in Paris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Legend. I know we lost him this past year.
We did. Yeah.
And that was super tragic because of so many reasons, but he was a great guy. I fished with him in like the dead of February. It was really tough fishing, but what time of year were you over there and what did you guys go after?
Yeah, so I got to go to Paris in the fall, and I want to say it was September, October. I want to say it was October, and I was in Europe actually working there with a sponsor and fishing a bass tournament called the Euro Cup. So yeah, so it was really awesome experience to go there and fish that tournament in Spain. But on the front side, we did kind of a couple stops, and one of them was Paris. I had always looked at Paris from afar and the fishing there, of course, in the Seine and stuff like that. And that is really like the early movement of city fishing, of urban fishing, of street fishing, right? It got way more popular in Europe earlier than it did here. And, like when I went there, I've known a Fred, like I'm a big follower on social media of what's going on in that scene over there. And it was just an unbelievable experience to get to fish with him and target giant perch, European perch, which is a species that
jumbos.
Jumbos. And I mean, I caught a 3 and a 4 pounder with Fred. It was just mind blowing. It's crazy. I mean, you're catching these fish and you look behind you and there's the Eiffel Tower, there's all these historic landmarks, churches, and just the history. It was unbelievable. It was just such a great experience,
By any chance, did you get to stop by his office and see his pet largemouth bass?
I did not. I didn't stop by his office.
He's got like an 8-pound largemouth in a fish tank. We were feeding it by hand.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Crazy. But what are some cities you still want to fish? What are some that are on your bucket list still?
I mean, there's a lot. So that's it. The great thing about that concept is it's an unlimited amount of places. When you start talking worldwide, right, then the scope becomes so big that I don't have enough time in my life. I'm 50. I wouldn't be able to fish every place. And I wish I had the opportunity to do it. But I think for sure, from a worldwide perspective, there are places I want to fish. Asian countries that I haven't been to, European countries I haven't been to, Australia. Some amazing fishing in Sydney, amazing fishing in Dubai. Can you imagine being in Dubai, downtown Dubai, with these so from an international scope, there's a lot, but there's a lot here too. I mean, I can think of, I mentioned Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls is a smaller Midwestern city. I got to go through there this year heading to a tournament. Awesome urban fishing scene there. I would love to be able to explore that. And there's so many of those. Like, when I look at a map, you just kind of look and you can point at any bigger city, any bigger dot on that map and be like, let me see, is there water? Yep, there's a river. Is there water? Oh yeah, this one's right on the coast. Is there water? And I think it's that kind of, it's almost like this bucket list that I really want to check off, you know, and I hope it gets to happen. I mean, I really aspire in this, I would call it the last stage of my career, to get back to doing more of that, whether that's with a show, a TV show, or whether that's doing digital content, or whether it's whatever it's through. I really do aspire to get back to doing more urban fishing and exploring new places, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is kind of limitless, right? Or endless, I should say.
Yes.
Just so much water, so many cities. And you've caught striped bass in a super fun site right in Brooklyn, the Gowanus Canal, right?
Oh boy, that was awesome. That was an eye opener. Yeah, and I got to do it. I got to do it in a kayak, which is really, really neat. That's a whole nother, like, you know, peel a different layer off, and it's a whole different layer of urban fishing that I hadn't really experienced a lot, which is doing it in a kayak. You know, I got to do a little bit of it in Austin, Texas, and it was awesome. But gone to the Gowanus in Brooklyn was amazing. Amazing from the standpoint at which, when you look at it from afar, you think there's no way that we're going to do any good here today. And then you put the kayaks in and you start catching these stripers, and they're healthy and they're beautiful, and you know, from 3 pounds to 10 pounds. And it was just amazing on light tackle. And it was awesome. It was a great experience, you know?
I'm surprised you didn't get snagged at all there. It seems like there's so much stuff there. I did the Gowanus Dredgers Club. We teamed up with them once and did like a canoe fishing trip throughout the canal. Yeah. And I just remember there being so much structure there. It looked good for blackfish. It really looked good for that.
Yeah. 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 It was an awesome trip. It was an awesome trip for sure. We caught a lot that day.
Have you fished in Denver? I know they have that big river that goes right through the heart of the city.
I haven't. That's on the bucket list. Denver for sure is on the bucket list. Portland, Oregon for sure is on the bucket list. There's so many cities, man. San Diego is on the bucket list.
Yeah.
Just a lot of places, man. A lot of places for me.
So you spend a lot of time on the road every year. How difficult is that? I mean, it seems like you have so many events. You're traveling to all these different places to fish.
Yeah.
How much does that road life wear on you?
It's honestly, it was and is the hardest part of my career. I love fishing to death, and I love competing to death still. I love that whole life, you know, but it is a gypsy life, and you know, with family and with kids, and you know, so I'm originally from South. Yeah, I got a big family, and I grew up in a South Philly family where family means everything, you know, like a lot of the people I grew up with, like, you never leave home. Like, a big trip is going an hour from the house, you know, like you live with your mom. Yeah. You live with your mom till your mom passes away. And then, you know, your kids live with you until you pass. Like, yeah, that's how it is. Right. So it's been the hardest part of my job. And, you know, especially with that family element, you know, leaving the kids, and I have 4 kids. So leaving the kids and missing stuff, graduations and games, and, you know, important things that a lot of people take for granted that I've missed. And, you know, there's that element of regret, but there's also that element of, you know, I'm doing something I love. It's part of what I do. And, you know, I think I've figured out ways over the years. Technology for sure has helped. But it's still the toughest part. You know, to this day, you know.
So what were some tournaments at the beginning that you won? I know a big one for you was in '94. You won, I think it was the North Carolina Top 100 Amateur Division.
Yeah.
Was that?
Yes.
Would you say that was when you finally were like, all right, I'm coming up now. This is it.
Yeah. There were some big ones, and you know, you look back on it, and you know, you look at it from different perspective, depending on if, you know, if you're religious or philosophical or whatever, you know, whatever your background is. But things happened at certain times for me that were important. Like, if you change it, the outcome of my life is different, right? So that one in North Carolina in 1994. So I was in college. I think I was a junior or sophomore in college, and I had no boat. I had my John boat, and I was dreaming about how do I do this, and and I fished a pro-am event as an amateur, and I won. And it was a big moment, because it gave me confidence. It was a moment where I said, I can compete with these guys nationally from the South. It was always this stereotype that guys from the Northeast, you can't do it. You can't compete with these guys that fish 300 days a year from the South. It's a Southern sport, right? So it gave me confidence, but it also, what I won in that tournament was a fully rigged bass boat. And that was my ticket to be able to get to the next level. So, there were tournaments that happened like that, throughout my career, that just, if it didn't happen, I don't know if I could have kept going, So there was that one. There was winning the National Amateur Championship in 1998 on the Red River, which sort of launched my career, got me into the Bassmaster Classic, got me into the elites. Back then they were the top 150s, but the elites, won the second event I ever as a pro in 1999 on Lake Champlain. So important, because I had no money. I had no real sponsors at that point. So, it's a unfortunate part of the sport, and still is. You do. It's not a sport yet like football or baseball or whatever, where you're drafted in and financially you're okay from the beginning. In this sport, as a rookie, as a young pro, as a newbie into the pro ranks, most of the time you're worried. You're living on a credit card, and there's a lot of bills, and your success a lot of times hinges on doing well in tournaments. And if you don't, a lot of times that can stifle it from the very beginning. And I was fortunate to win one early, and my whole career was like that. Things happened at certain times. And of course, the Classic in 2003, life-changing for me. Angler of the Year in 2006, life-changing for me. The two goals I had since I was a kid. But to this day, and I don't know that I don't know that it'll ever be able to top it in my mind and in my soul, is when I won in Philadelphia at home. When I won on the tidal Delaware River in Philly, literally fishing the same urban city places that I've fished since I was a kid. Like, I mean, the same places. It gives me chills just talking about it.
Yeah.
To be able to win at home, and that crowd and the energy that was there, that's at the top of my list. I mean, guys are going to criticize me for saying that was the most important bit, but for me, it felt the most special, and it will always be there, probably as number one.
Yeah, that's amazing to win at home, to win it all. It's like the dream right there. What do you do after that?
It felt like it came full circle there for me, and my grandfather at that point has passed away for a while at that point, but my uncle was there, right? My mom was there, a lot of cousins, friends, a lot of that club that I talked about that I joined in 1990, they were all there. So it really did feel like it had come full circle for me at that point,
So you mentioned that stereotype of being a guy from the Northeast trying to break into, a part of the fishing industry that is mostly guys from the South with bass boats and stuff. Do you think that's something that you still fight against to this day? Like, do you think that's, you're still trying to prove to these guys that you can hang with them?
I think there's a lot less. I think there are still some of those stereotypes, but I think what I dealt with in this, call it mid to late 90s, it definitely is a different world now. And it was awesome because, when I really broke into it, late 90s, my first full year as a pro was 99, there was a new crop of people coming in at the same time. So, you had guys from the West Coast, which you'd never had before. You had, guys, you had international competitors coming in. You had some anglers from different races, right? You had Ish Monroe coming in, right? You had this diversity in the late 90s, early 2000s. And at the same time, ESPN was a really big part of the sport at that period. And they were highlighting these different personalities, and guys like Skeet and Ish Monroe and Byron Velvet and all these guys that didn't fit the mold. And that really helped change, the sport. It helped change the perception and the stereotyping, and it really did change, I think, in those years. And it's a different place now than it was back then. You couple that with the fact that, now we've got these high school programs and college programs, and it's a different place. Is there may still be a little bit of that around, but it's definitely not like it was in the mid '90s for sure.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. I just had this kid on from Auburn University from their bass team, and
Okay,
we were
yeah.
we were talking about what goes into getting some of these kids, they get like scouted as if it's like any other sport. It's pretty cool, but it's for the most
Yeah,
part it's mainly a southern thing. I mean,
yeah,
it's pretty amazing to me to because I'm also a kid from Jersey. It's
yeah.
amazing that you did this. It's just so cool. And one thing I really want to talk to you about is, what do you think it is that makes you so competitive?
That's a great question, and I think there's two parts probably to that. I think one part is the environment you grew up in, right? I think your environmental, the way you grew up, definitely affects the way that you live, and the way that your life goes. And so for me, um, getting to grow up in a household where they were mainly blue collar workers, right? My immediate family, my extended family, they were guys that busted their ass, women that busted their ass, worked hard. Like, if they weren't the best at something, they just worked their ass off to get to a place where they got better, or they got good, or they made more money, whatever, right? They worked. So that was life changing for me, because I was able to really carry that into other parts of my life, including competitive fishing. And I think that's always been my strength. Has been I'm a hard worker. I like to get in there and get dirty and grind. I don't mind the long days. And it's what I love to do, right? So I'm very, it just feels natural to work hard. So that's been a big part of it for sure. I think just that work ethic, has been a big part of it. And then there's the second part, which I think is got two facets to it. One is sort of like this natural ability that's in someone, and then the second part, is taking that and just doing it, right? Like, the best example I can give is one of my kids now, my son Vegas. And it's hard to describe, but he's had this natural ability since he was very young, like literally since he could hold a rod. He's 11 now. Um, he has this natural connection with fish. I know this sounds weird. It sounds freaky, right? Like, it's unbelievable. Like, he just is very natural on the water, and he has a way of thinking about things, fish and in the environment, that is just naturally good. And so I think, having that natural ability, but then, taking it to the next level. And that's really just repetition and practice. Like, it's no different in any other sport. It's no different than any of my other kids. I have kids that play soccer and field hockey, and I have kids that love fashion, and it's like, if you want to get to the next level, you got to practice. You have to engage in the activity, so
So
that repetition aspect of it.
definitely. So what goes into your practice? What is there a certain lake that you find tougher than others that you live
So,
by that you
yeah,
kind of go to push yourself at? Like, let's hear a little bit about that.
yeah, yeah. So practice, I think there's a general thought on practice, and then there's a specific one. The general thought is, you have to go out and work on things that are new, unfamiliar, and things that you aren't good at, right? So I'll use myself as an example. I didn't have a great competitive season this year, and I'm not great at using a lot of this new sonar technology, including forward-facing sonar, right? It's changing the way that we fish, and it's gone in fresh and saltwater. Uh, so like that is something that now I know it's a weakness. It's something I'm not good at. I have to go and practice that. And like, as I'm talking to you this fall, my goal and one of my motivations on how to get better is to practice that technology, right? To get good at it. So, I think there's things, early on when I was young, I was doing it unconsciously, right? I was like, I would just do it because I saw this lure that I never saw before, and I'm like, man, I want to learn about this jig. It's a jig head with a skirt on it. How the hell do you fish that thing? So I would lock it in my hands as a kid and fish it over and over and over and over until I started catching fish on it. Right? That's a basic example of how you can practice, especially things that you don't know or you're not good at. So there's that aspect, and then there's the specific aspect, which is practicing for a tournament, like a location. And the interesting thing about a career is that early in my career I had a lot more time to practice locations and actual events. And as your career builds and grows, right, like you get pulled in different directions, and that's just part of it, right? Your portfolio of sponsor grows, and then you have new businesses that emerge, and so you're pulled in different directions. But practicing for specific locations is really important too, right? Because you get familiar with the body of water, you scout locations, and each place is unique. A lake in upstate New York is not like a lake in Georgia, and a lake in Georgia is not like a lake in Texas. So there's that specific practice, which is just hard to replace. It's hard to, nothing beats getting there and actually practicing, right?
Yeah.
So there's the general, and then there's the specific. There's both.
So on that, I know you get X amount of practice days per tournament, right? For each
Yes.
location. So when you're going into a new body of water that you've never fished, and you have those practice days, and say it's a body of water that you've never fished, and those practice days are all you have, what are the most important factors that you're trying to take into account that you're going to use in order to win the tournament?
Yeah, I'll give you three of the biggest factors, and that's a great question. It happens to me a lot still. If you fish, you're gonna sooner or later be thrown into a place where you haven't fished, and you have a limited amount of time to figure it out. And it's these three things that have really worked for me over the years. The first one is to apply seasonal pattern to the place, right? So like it can take a 50,000 acre lake you've never been, and you could cut it in half just by saying, what are the fish doing this time of the year, on this particular body of water? And that's the great thing about that one, is that's something you could do before you ever get there, right? So, I can look at the schedule for next year and see Lake Okeechobee is our first event. And although I've been there, that lake is massive. But I know that our tournament is the third week of February. Well, I know those fish are spawning, right? So I can take out, really deep wintering locations. I could take out certain elements and concentrate more on places where those fish will spawn. And a lot of times that cuts the lake in half, sometimes even more than that, right? So there's that application. The second part to that is to break the lake down and to not get overwhelmed and actually fish manageable sections of the lake. And I'm really big into doing that. A lot of times what I try to do is cut a lake or a river or whatever in the thirds. And when I do that, it really starts to make me more comfortable and not overwhelmed, right? So I say the lower third of the lake down near the dam, the deep water, the middle of the lake, right? It's got elements of both. And then you got the upper ends, maybe where the lake is fed by a river, right? And you sort of break it down. One element to that, and it's always true, especially in freshwater, and this is a real great rule of thumb, is the biggest areas of flats, the flattest areas in a lake, river, bay, ocean, the flattest areas will always contain the largest number of fish. And that is a fact that has never changed for me, especially in freshwater over the years. So I look for those big flats. I break it into thirds. I break it into manageable sections. I apply that seasonal pattern, right? I can do a little historical research, take some notes. But this third part is the most important. And here it goes. And this is fishing in a nutshell. And this is why I still love it now at 50 as much as I did when I was 5. And it's the fact that at the end of the day, nothing else matters except what the fish tell you. and, and the best form of practice is listening to the fish, is opening up your mind and your ears and, you know, your ideas to the fish. And so, you know, maybe an easier way to say that is when I'm practicing, especially early in a practice, or early, you know, the first couple hours or first day of a place I've never been, I'm really fishing a lot of things in front of me. I'm sort of fishing a lot of things, you know, shallow, deep, mid depth. I'm sort of just fishing until I start to get bites, because that's the real key in all of fishing to me, is listening to fish. I've called it, over the years, I've called it fishing the moment. And that just means you're fishing for the now, right now, what's happening at that moment for the next cast. And when you start doing that, you know, when you start listening to the fish and you start getting comfortable with fishing and sort of listening to them and letting the fish tell you, you really get good. You know, you leave your baggage at home. You know, it's the fish don't listen to books. They don't read books. They don't, you know, at the end of the day, a fish does what he wants to do. And it's usually because of food or sex, right? So, you know, that's been a big thing for me in practice, is fish the moment. When I go fishing in practice, I'm trying to get a bite. And when I get that bite, I want to say, why? Why'd I get that bite? And I want that bite to lead to my next bite, and that next bite to lead to my next bite. You know, that's the ultimate way to fish. It really is, you know?
So that's how you break the code down.
That's the biggest, I mean, and it's funny because here's the thing. It's easy for me to talk about it to you right now, right? It sounds so simple, but it gets hard because we're human, right? Human nature is, you want to fish history and you want to remember and you want to close your eyes and remember those experiences. Remember back in 2010 when I fished something just like
They were really chewing on this. Yeah.
right. And you should really, you know, if you free yourself to just fishing for that cast, that moment, then fishing becomes it becomes a lot more natural, you know? And honestly, like all the guys that are really good in the 70s, in my era, now, if you look at all these young guys, you know, Wheeler and Connell and Lucas, the guys that are dominating the sport, they're really good at fishing the moment. And that fact I don't think will ever change, you know?
How important is barometric pressure when fishing, especially with freshwater? Because I feel like I'm always keeping an eye on it. Whenever I'm going freshwater fishing, I'm always Googling it to see what's going on. But how much are you paying attention to that when you're fishing?
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic, and I'll give you 2 things on that. The first one is, I talked to a biologist who was doing an article, and I think it was an article for Field and Stream, and he was a fisheries biologist, PhD, smarter man than I'll ever be in my whole life. And he basically interviewed me, and I told him what I'm about to tell you. And at the end of the conversation, he said, from a scientific standpoint, they can't prove pressure has anything to do with the way fish feed and behave, a falling or rising barometric pressure. But I flat out told him that it's happened, like, you know, I'm 40 years into it, 30 years professionally. I've seen it too many times for it to be a coincidence. And he heard the same thing from anglers throughout this interview. And he interviewed saltwater guys and walleye guys, and all the anglers said the same thing. You know, so you have the scientific part and you have the part that's, you know, we're out doing it, right? And we see it. And so I believe in barometric pressure. And my big rule is always that, you know, that falling barometer to me is always the best. I want to see, you know, an approaching front, an approaching storm, cloudy weather, building clouds. When that barometer is falling, it always feels like the fish get more aggressive and they get more loose to cover and they want to eat more. You know, a steady barometer, steady fishing. A falling barometer, really good fishing. And then the kiss of death for me is that rising barometer, and when I look at those days are the storm is past and it's a bluebird day. There's not a cloud in the sky. And you look at that barometric pressure and it's rising. And that really, I think, makes the fishing tougher. To me, it shuts them down a little. They get tighter. They're not looser. They get tighter now, and they feed less, right? So it's an interesting topic, man. But I believe that falling pressure is really good, and that's the best time to go fishing.
So when you see it rising on a tournament day, are you just like, oh man, I'm really gonna have to work for this today?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like I said, in a tournament perspective, you got to take what you're given, right? So I can't say, oh, it's a bad day to fish. And really, what I've experienced on high pressure days and tournaments is like three things. Like I have to go deeper, I have to go thicker or tighter to cover, or, I have to really, really slow down and get more finesse. And, that to me, they're generally the cures for that high pressure. So, a lot of fish that are deep will slide deeper. A lot of times they'll suspend. They're tough to catch, but it's not impossible. A lot of times those shallow fish, they get really buried under that cover, whatever it is. It could be grass, could be a dock, it could be around rocks or seawalls. They just get tight. And that's difficult. But, a spinning rod, lighter line, smaller baits, slowing down, that's always been a cure for me on those high pressure bluebird days.
What's one or, some of the toughest bodies of water that you've fished, and why?
True. Yeah. I would say I'm going to give you two. And one is, I already mentioned it, but one is Florida. And, in particular, maybe Florida is not even the right way to say it. Florida strain bass are very, very difficult. And it's a species that can get really big. And it's an amazing, it's a kind of a sub part of largemouth.
Is it a hybrid between a northern largemouth and a strain of bass from Texas? Is that
No, it's its own strain. So
it's its own strain
a hybrid
from Florida.
It's its own strain from Florida.
Okay.
Yep, Florida strain bass, and they are very, very prone to stop eating. It gets tough when the smallest changes happen. So a northern bass, what we deal with, cold front sometimes helps a little, and it doesn't shut them down as much. They're sort of used to those changes, right? They live in a changing world up here. But the Florida strain, very, very difficult, shuts down a lot. So I would say Florida strain fish, especially in Florida, it's always been a thorn in my side. The other one is extremely clear, deep water. So, like the ones that come to mind are a lot of the West Coast fisheries. So like a Lake Mead or a Lake Havasu, like these canyon reservoirs where you can read the date on a penny in 20 and 30 foot of water, right? It's that clean. It just has always been uncomfortable for me in freshwater, especially, to fish for fish that are 40, 50, 60, 70 feet deep, right? That's always been a little out of my comfort zone. And that's a tough environment for me as well.
Why is fishing deeper tougher for you?
I think it may just be a little bit of how I grew up. Honestly, in Philadelphia, and South Jersey, but like where I live now, deep water's 10 feet. 20 foot is like the abyss around here, I think there's that intimidation factor, and, a lot of my early experiences, I just didn't deal with that. But, I've worked on it over the years. Is another one of those things where, we talked about practice. It's like work on things that you're not good at, right? So, I've gotten better at it, but it's still uncomfortable. Fishing for a largemouth bass or a smallmouth bass in 80 feet of water is uncomfortable.
Yeah, 80 feet of water is deep, man. Oh my
It's
gosh.
deep.
I mean, that's definitely deep. So
Yeah.
I've asked this to a few different freshwater guys, but what do you prefer, largemouth bass or smallmouth?
From the perspective of how the fish fights, nothing beats a smallmouth. And so from that angle, if I'm fun fishing and if I'm just fishing for that fight, the hook up in the fight, right? Not fun fishing, non-tournament scenarios, Smallmouth, smallmouth, smallmouth. You can't beat that fight. But the largemouth is a lot more predictable, and they swim a lot less. You know, the joke about smallmouth is that's what they do. They just swim, right? They're very, very unpredictable. I can't tell you how many tournaments over the years where I've caught them like crazy in practice, and then you go back and literally they swam 10 miles in like a day. Like, I'm not kidding you. Like, actually, I found them like 10 miles away, the same group of fish. So, you know, smallmouth swim. Largemouth have a tendency to stay put a little bit more. So, from a tournament perspective, I'd rather catch largemouth.
Gotcha. If you had to throw one lure for an entire like day, what would be your go-to for a largemouth bass specifically? I know it depends on the, you know, but you know, some people swear by the Texas rig Senko. They, you know, some people just have that one go-to. Do you have that?
I do, and I do, but I'm going to give you two again, because if I had one lure, my go-to for catching bigger fish, you know, and that's a mentality that is a great mentality, whether you fun fish or tournament fish, but especially if you tournament fish, right? In the 5 fish tournament circuits, that's all that matters, is catching bigger ones. You can catch 52 pounders, but at the end of the day, you need 5 big ones, right? So for that, I don't. It's always been, since, you know, the first couple times I've thrown it to now, a skirted jig catches more big fish. It's, you know, it caught the biggest fish I ever caught in a tournament. It's I would say over half of the biggest bass I've ever caught in my life have come on it. So a skirted jig, you know, a jig and crawl, a jig and, you know, a pork style bait, like that skirted jig is what I would pick. But if I have to get bites, if I have to just catch fish, right? If you're saying, here's a lure, you can go anywhere in the world, Taipei, Taiwan, even, to catch snakeheads or largemouth, it would be that soft stick bait. You mentioned it. It's honestly, when it comes to like talking about game-changing lures or shapes, man, I don't think anything beats it, just because of the versatility of that lure. You know, a 5-inch soft stick bait, like a Senko or a Berkeley Power Bait General or a Max Scent General, dude, you can Texas rig it, wacky rig it, you could drop shot it, you could Carolina rig it, you could twitch it on top. It's just such a versatile bait. And I think in the last, let's call it 10 years, I've probably caught more fish on a soft stick bait, you know, rigged all those ways, not rigged one specific way. Probably caught more fish on that lure than any other bait out there, for sure.
There's so many people trying to do this. What's, you know, a good piece of advice you would give to somebody trying to make a living off the entertainment side of the fishing industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I you know, honestly, the best advice when I look back, you know, at my career, and I did a lot of things right, I did a lot of things wrong. I wasn't, you know, it wasn't perfect in the things I did over my career. But the one thing I did right is to be authentic. And, you know, like, if you're getting in this sport, whether you're a tournament competitor or a YouTube personality, or you got a TV show, or you're working as a rep, or whatever you're doing, being authentic in what you do in the fishing world is very, very important, you know? So, like for me, you know, the brand that I created isn't some random brand that I concocted, you know, scribbled on a notepad one night. It isn't something that, you know, that I looked at somebody else and took this or that. It, you know, a brand and who you are should be you. And, you know, everybody's unique, right? So it's like, you know, a brand really should utilize and highlight elements that make you, right? That are your, you know, your personal brand, right? It's who you are. And that's the biggest thing I did right in my career. You know, I was different, and it was strange to people, and it was offensive to people, some people in the beginning. But when I look back, you know, now flash forward all these years, it was the biggest thing I did right, because it was authentic and people could relate to it, and people, you know, people could say, hey, that guy's like me, or man, hey, that emotion's real, or hey, you know. So that authenticness to what you're doing is probably the most important thing. You know, just be real, whether it's a social post or a YouTube video or a TV show or tournament. be real, be who you are, and portray that, whatever that is. That's an important thing.
Definitely. You got to stay true. Absolutely. Have there ever been any moments along the way where you came close to quitting?
Yes. Yes. Deep down inside, maybe it was just all like a front that subconsciously I was, just trying to put out there. But there were a few, and I think that's human nature is when things are tough, sometimes you want to quit and you want to run, and sometimes you want to blame certain things on what you're doing. And especially when things aren't going right, it's an easy out, right? It's an easy escape. A lot of those moments now, as an old guy, I look back on it and I say, "Oh, thank God I didn't," because it was the wrong thing. Like, I was getting out when it was the biggest thing I loved in my life, and I was trying to get out. But I look back and I think there were some tough times in my career where I said, "Man, is this really what I should be doing?" I think and some of that was financial. Some of that was I wasn't doing good in tournaments early on. There was some of that. And then, of course, there's a moment in my life where I went through a divorce, and that was a big thing in my life at that time. It was a big moment for me, and that caused me to step back and say, at the time I was like, "Man, fishing has ruined my life." It's like fishing's the reason I'm getting divorced, and I was like putting all the blame on that. And I was honestly, I had built it up in my mind that I was getting out of it. And then again, things happen. I ended up winning the Classic that year, and things happen for a reason. And I realized that it was a mistake, and this is what I love to do. So, but that's life, though. I think if you ask anybody, they're going to give you a story like that in their life. And I think your character is built by getting through those moments and continuing on with your life, and getting to a place where you should be.
I agree. And I agree that I think if you asked any successful person if they'd ever thought about quitting, the answer would be yes, unless they were lying. So
I think there's probably a moment or two that was like
definitely,
that. Yeah.
definitely. The last thing I have on my list here of questions is, what's your personal best largemouth bass? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, personal best largemouth bass was a 14-1 that I caught practicing for a tournament on Lake Amistad, which is a border lake with Texas and Mexico. Never caught that fish in the tournament. Let it go, thinking that, man, maybe I'll come back and catch it. But 3 years later, on the same lake, same fishery, Lake Amistad, I caught a 12-13 in the tournament. So biggest fish ever and biggest fish in a tournament, both from Lake Amistad.
That's amazing. Were they both on different lures?
They were. So the big one was, and this is really funny, the 14-1 was on a soft stick bait. It was on a 6-inch soft stick bait, but it was on a soft stick bait. The 12-13 on a skirted jig. So it's the two lures that I mentioned to you are the two lures that caught my biggest bass.
That's amazing. That's so cool, man. I also, sorry, I have so many questions for you, but I'm not going to take up that much more of your time. But
okay.
I want to hear about Bass University a little bit, and I want to hear about the Ike Foundation. I know the Ike Foundation, I was looking into it. You guys have given out some college scholarships, huh? That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. The Ike Foundation is something that's really, really special for us. And when I say us, Becky and I, because she's worked just as hard with this as I have. But I think we're almost about 10 years into it. And about 10 years ago, we got to a point in our career and in business where we said, it's time to give back and do something really good, and up to that point, we're already working with, a lot of foundations and a lot of great causes, but it was like, it's time to have something of our own that we work hard at. That's just for good, right? For the betterment of people, and have control. And it was like, it was almost a no brainer, but, again, just really looking back at my life and saying, man, how many times have there been kids that have had the opportunity to fish, but they couldn't, right? They couldn't because they didn't have the means, or they didn't have an uncle or a grandfather like I had, or they didn't have a friend that fished. And that really was the start of it. That became our mission for the foundation, to get kids fishing, to focus on kids that that aren't in traditional areas, right? Because, you know, a kid in Dothan, Alabama has a lot better chance of growing up fishing than a kid in New York City or a kid in Philadelphia. So that really became the mission of the foundation, and it's been awesome. It's really grown. Yeah, we're continuing to grow it. You know, we work with a lot of different programs to get new kids fishing, and the scholarship's part of that. You know, the scholarship's a really neat way that we can get kids that are in high school that love the outdoors, that want to further their education, and you know, apply for the scholarship. So it's been great, man. It's probably the most rewarding piece to the business that we're engaged in every day.
And then is Bass University, is that also your creation?
It is. So yeah, so B.A.S.S University is another cool branch of the business, and that one goes even further back. You know, we're probably gone on about 16 or 17 years with that one, but that one was really like this need to help teach people, you know, fishing, and it's specifically bass fishing, right? A higher level of bass fishing. And we would speak at these seminars, and there was a program about 17, 18 years ago where these programs would travel across the United States and speak at different cities, and it would hire bass pros to come and talk about what they do. And we loved it. We loved it. Pete and I loved instructing there. We loved speaking at those programs. That one went away. And like, we literally, I think it was like a year went by where we didn't have that ability to teach at that level. And we just looked at each other like, we need to bring this back, you know? So that's sort of where it started. But you know, as the world changed, it evolved. And, you know, so the B.A.S.S University in its present form it's still on location instruction. You know, we do, you know, 8 to 10 cities a year, but it's really morphed into online education and bass fishing education at your fingertips, right? So, you know, cell phone or a laptop or a tablet, you know, people on the fly, people on the go, people that can't make it to a city to attend a class. You know, that's how people consume content now, right? That's how they get information. So we've morphed it, but it's still, the premise of it's to help teach people to become better bass fishermen, you know?
That's so cool. So what is next for Mike Iaconelli?
This is the hardest question of the night for me. But I did. I was honestly out of service there. But you know, here's the honest answer. And you know, maybe the best way to put it is like, you know, you know, it's the last phase of my career. Maybe is a way to say it, or maybe you could say, you know, the last 4 chapters, you know, of this story, you know, which is my career. And the honest answer is, you know, competitively, I see an end to that part of my fishing career, you know, and I don't know what that number is. It may be, you know, 2 or 3 years, it may be 10 years, you know, but it's in that scope where I do see a day coming where I decide to hang up the competitive hat. So that's going to happen. That's a given. But, you know, as far as my involvement in fishing and turning the page and turning the dial to the next thing, you know, that's going to keep going, you know, and so the great thing is there are all these things already in place. You mentioned 2 of them, you know, the Ike Foundation, getting kids fishing, B.A.S.S University, teaching kids, right? The podcast, you know, Ike Live, and the social, the digital stuff, like all that's going to continue. That's a given. But I really feel like the next phase is going to focus on getting back to some of the things that I used to do. And one of them is the one we talked about. So I think a new city fishing show is coming real soon. I really do. And I can't tell you that for a fact, but I can say with pretty good certainty you're going to see another city fishing show back on TV in some form really soon. So that's coming. And then another thing that I think is definitely going to come is, you know, one of the things that I got to experience, and I know you did too, in Europe, is the street fishing scene where it's competitive fishing and like almost these gatherings. And in Europe, they have a lot of these fishing festivals where it's almost like, yeah, they're street fishing tournaments, right? It's almost like a marathon. Like, you show up the day before. They call it a training session where you train on Friday. That night you show up for, a dinner and a banquet, and it's this camaraderie of like-minded urban fishermen. And then on Saturday, it's honestly like a marathon where they have, a big strip across the cloth of paper, and you break through, and there's this street fishing tournament and multi-species, and there's all these different ways to do it. But I see a day coming when I really try to work with people to get this going in the United States. I think it'd be a hit here. I would love to do it.
I totally agree. It would be an absolute hit. Another question I'm thinking of as we're talking about this is, why do you think street fishing or urban fishing, why do you think it's bigger in Europe than it is in the States?
I think it's bigger in Europe because there are more cities. There are more people that fish in city centers, and there's less access to big boat rural lakes in Europe, right? So if you look at, France or Italy or Spain or Portugal or anywhere like that, most of the people live in city centers. They live in urban areas, and they don't have access to big trucks. They don't have access to big boats. A lot of times they don't even have access to small boats or kayaks. So, so bank fishing, street fishing, urban fishing has been more of a custom there for a longer period of time. It's been more accepted. So they are ahead of the curve a little bit on us on some of the things they're doing, but it's a great way to model, we can model that. We could do it here in the States. And I think it would be a hit. I think it'd be a great way to just keep spreading the word about it,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, that they're constantly organizing these tournaments over there. And for the most part, they're pretty friendly tournaments. I mean, I got invited by Fred to go to one in Amsterdam, and I think it was 2015. And it wasn't like anything, at the end of the day, everybody's still friends. They're drinking beer at the end of it. It's nothing crazy. It's just a cool vibe. It's a cool vibe. I would love to see that brought to the States.
Super cool vibe. A lot of camaraderie. And again, it's about bringing people together. And I think, events like that really do spread the word of how accessible this is, how accessible fishing is to everyone, even people that live in the city. So I hope it happens. I'd love to be a part of it.
What you said towards the end, where you said just being yourself was the best thing you ever did. And that it's not easy to be yourself sometimes, especially when the cameras are on you and all the attention is on you. You feel like you might have to change a little bit or act a certain way, but to really be yourself, there's so much to be said for that. And I really respect that, man. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's important. And like I said, it's not always peachy, to this day, I've had people that, don't like who I am and don't like what I represent. But if you stay the course and you're really true to who you are, it always works out in the end. So, it's worked out for me.
Just waiting for you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Brooklyn Fishing Club podcast. If you'd like to hear previous episodes, or if you're interested in joining the club, visit brooklynfishingclub.com for more info.